Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining today's Career Lunch and Learn program, Stories in Science, Vessels of Power and Possibility, being brought to you by the MIT Alumni Association and is sponsored in part by the MIT Federal Credit Union, MIT Professional Education, and MIT Sloan Executive Education. My name is Julie Pryor, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. I am the Communications Officer at the McGovern Institute for Brain Research here at MIT. My job is to help our neuroscientists translate their complex research into stories that the general public can understand. It is a challenging but deeply gratifying role, and I look forward to learning from today's program. As a reminder, our webinar is being broadcast live. Throughout the program, you may submit your questions using the Q&A feature in your Zoom toolbar. For all of our listeners joining via YouTube, you may add your questions to the comments field. All questions will be held until the end of the presentation. And now I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker, scientist turned journalist, Ari Daniel, who earned his PhD in biology from MIT in 2008. Ari has always been drawn to science and the natural world. As a kid, he packed his green wildlife treasury box full of species cards. As a graduate student, Ari trained gray seal pups for his master's degree at the University of St. Andrews and helped tag wild Norwegian killer whales for his PhD at MIT and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. These days, as senior digital producer for NOVA and an independent science reporter for outlets including public radio, Ari works with a species that he's better equipped to understand, Homo sapiens. He has reported on science topics across 5 continents. He's a co-recipient of the AAAS Kavli Science Journalism Gold Award for his radio stories on glaciers and climate change in Greenland and Iceland. And Ari also co-produces the Boston branch of the Story Collider, a live storytelling show about science. And finally, having worked with Ari on a NOVA video about a microscopy technique here at the McGovern Institute, I could say on a personal note that Ari is simply great at telling stories about science. And with that, I will turn things over to Ari.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for being here today. I'm so excited to be talking to you. I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes or so, and then we're going to open it up for questions at the end. So I'm going to be talking, as Julie mentioned, about stories in science, vessels of power and possibility. I trade in storytelling. But what I want you to know is that storytelling is a skill that can really be applied across the board. It's not just something that is unique to those of us who do science or talk about science for a living. Storytelling is pervasive across all fields. So I'm going to be talking about some of the things I think about when I tell stories, but I know that many of the things I'm going to be saying will have broad application beyond science. So my presentation has a heavy ceramic theme. I'm going to start by just focusing a little bit. I just wanted to unpack a little bit more about my journey to where I got to how I got to where I am today. This bowl is a bowl that I used to eat out of when I was a kid. My mom gave me, took a picture of it. They still have this set of 4 bowls, but only one of them had the all gone at the bottom. And I loved it because as I was eating cereal or soup, the reward for me when I finished my meal was that all gone at the bottom. And when I was little, during the time when I was eating out of this bowl, when I was in elementary school, I remember reading a lot about the decimation of the rainforest and how there were trees that were being cut down and species of animal and plant and fungi and all sorts of things that we knew about and didn't know about that were in peril. And the more I read, the more kind of worked up I got about it. And I recall being on vacation with my family and telling my mom that how upset I was. And I started to cry. And here's my mom here on the left. That's little me, and my grandmother on the right, my mom's mom, two very important women in my life. And my mom said to me, Ari, it's so important that you're feeling the feelings that you have, but it's also important that you do something about those feelings. And that really stayed with me, more so than it did for my mom, who, when I told her I was going to talk about this story, she had no recollection of it. So, but it stayed with me. And the first thing that I did was I actually, I spent a lot of time learning about science and trying to immerse myself in the natural world, which I have always been long drawn to. And when I was in college, I went to the rainforest. On the left, I'm with a group looking out at it. On the right, I'm swinging through it. And as I wrapped up college, I realized that I wanted to spend more time kind of learning about the world around me. And that's what led me to graduate school at MIT and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, where I spent a lot of time, where I spent my time studying wild killer whales. Here I am in northern Norway. I'm in the orange Mustang suit. I was interested in their behavior and their vocalizations and how they work together to feed on herring. And it was really just a fantastic chance for me to be out learning about the real world and learning how hard science is to do. And I loved working on that degree. And as I was finishing that degree, I realized that I wanted to share my love of the natural world within biology, but beyond biology in science, with people outside of my lab, outside of my department, university. I really wanted to communicate science more broadly. And so that's kind of when I pivoted from doing science research to doing science journalism. Here I am interviewing a glacier, and this was for a set of radio stories and videos that I was doing for The World and Nova, respectively. And so that's kind of where I am today. I spend most of my time working as senior digital producer at Nova, where I am in charge of helping to create a lot of our digital video and other multimedia content. And then I also do freelance work as a science reporter for a variety of places, including radio, video, live storytelling. So I thought I would kind of work through a set of things that I keep in mind when I'm putting together science stories. I told you that ceramics would feature throughout this webinar. The first thing I'm going to talk about here, you see those trees and mountains on the crockery there. I'm going to talk about scene. And for me, scene is something that's very important when crafting a story. Often I find that if I can place an idea or an explanation inside of a location, it becomes way more memorable. The idea gets a kind of physical home in the story that I'm communicating. So I'm going to play for you a clip from a public radio story, an NPR story that I did on when I was in Guam a couple years ago, an island in the tropical Pacific. That's all I'll do to set it up. But I will say that the screen's going to go dark when I play audio clips through the webinar. It's not broken. I'm intentionally leaving it dark so that you can hear the sound. So here's the first clip. It's a couple minutes.
It's a couple hours after sunset, and everyone's donning a wetsuit. Zippers yank clothes against bare backs. In minutes, I'm standing among 15 to 20 dark figures in a graveyard on the west coast of Guam.
Somebody has a light.
They're not here for the tombstones. No, they've come to help rescue something else from dying in the waters nearby, the corals.
Okay, let's go.
Dirk Peterson is easily the largest person in the group.
It's gonna be the night, guys. Spawning time.
Spawning is what happens when corals have sex. The reefs we see are actually colonies of millions of tiny animals, and in a single night they cast a fog of sperm and eggs into the water, some of which fertilize to make baby coral larvae, and some of those larvae settle back onto the reef, making it grow. Peterson is the founder and executive director of an organization called SeaCor, which stands for Sexual Coral Reproduction. His mission is to gather sperm and eggs from the corals, fertilize them in the lab, and return the baby corals to the wild. Think of it like IVF for the reefs.
I will give the other one to Mitch.
The team divvies up the collection containers and heads to the beach.
Everyone's getting their snorkel ready, sharing lights so they can see what they're doing, and wading out into the water.
I follow along underneath the stars with Richard Ross, a biologist with the California Academy of Sciences.
Sprinkled out all around are little patches of coral colonies.
Under the water, it's just a constant safari. You hope you're going to see the coral spawning, and you never know if it's even going to happen.
So that's the first couple minutes from that story. And the reason that I wanted to share it with you is because of how I tried to evoke scene there. The story opens and I try to set up a little bit of mystery. We're at a graveyard. People are donning wetsuits. It's not entirely clear what's going on or why what they're doing is happening. The story itself is only 4 or 5 minutes, so there's not a ton of time to set up the mystery, so it has to be condensed. But hopefully it gets people interested enough to be like, what exactly is happening here? All of it takes place on location. We're near the cemetery. You hear the sounds of the zippers being pulled, the neoprene. It's all kind of unfolding. And then I introduce the idea that they're here not for what is dead in the ground, but what may be dying in the waters nearby. That transitions us almost like a film. You sort of move the camera. It's now facing out at the water. We're talking about the corals. It buys me enough time to explain a little bit about coral reproduction, just enough so that the listener has a sufficient understanding for the rest of the story. But I don't want to go on too long because we want to get back to the action. The action recommences as we walk out into the water and wade into the shallow water there. And and the other thing that I try to do in all of my radio reporting, it's a tip that I picked up from other reporters, is to voice my observations while I'm in the field. So I talk about how I see people wading out into the water. And I do that for a couple reasons. The first is that I could easily record that narration in the studio afterwards, like I've recorded most of my narration in the piece. But there's something about actually being there that puts me in the very scene I'm trying to create. It's also because there's a difference in tone. There's a kind of reverence. When I'm there and it's dark and I see the stars above me and I'm out in the world, there's a different feeling because I'm there and I'm conveying what it's like to be there in the moment, rather than me being in the studio later where all of those kind of sensory details are eliminated from my perception. You can hear it in my voice. So there's that. Even the way the characters get introduced, the first scientist, when he kind of announces himself, I don't even say who he is at first. I let him kind of enter into the scene. It's a bit like staging a play, and the characters are kind of walking on, and I'm trying to paint a backdrop, trying to evoke the sound of being in that place. And so all of the ideas that I'm communicating, the difficulty that the corals are having, how reproduction happens in corals, all of it's happening in scene. So let me kind of fast forward to the last part of the story, so what happens now in the intervening bit is that while we're waiting for the corals to spawn, I go interview a couple of other people, and then finally it happens, the corals begin to spawn, and that's where the rest of the story picks up.
We've got a whole slick going on.
Those little white dots that are kind of swirling around.
Exactly.
Looks like kind of the Milky Way.
Yeah. Hey, you came on a good night.
Only problem is it's the wrong species. The spawn's from the big Porites boulder corals, and the team doesn't have the right equipment to collect it. Dirk Peterson admits defeat.
Patient. Tomorrow's another night.
The next night, they bring the right equipment, but there's not enough spawn. The following night, they try a different location, but again, not enough. The spawning window has closed. It's part of what makes the work so difficult. Before leaving Guam, I paddle a kayak 1,200 feet from shore underneath a fiery sunset sky. Nicole Burns, a grad student at the University of Guam, kicks her way down to a coral nursery below me. And when she surfaces, bobbing beside me, she's holding a small cement pyramid in her hand with a staghorn the size of a crouton growing on its surface. It's a baby coral.
Yes. Yeah, kind of looks like a little baby too. It's light in color and it's, got a little pink on it.
This baby's 2 years old and came from spawn collected at sea and fertilized on shore. It's been growing in the nursery ever since, cared for by Burns, among others.
We tend to them, and then once they're big enough, then you plant them out to be in nature and in the wild.
The next day, this baby will be placed on a reef farther up the coast, where everyone's hoping it'll grow up to stand guard against an uncertain future.
That's the end of the story. I should say that while I was in the field with the scientists, and it's actually one of my favorite things to do, is to get to go out in the field and be around scientists and see what they're doing. It's one of the things that I enjoyed most about being in graduate school. When I was there, they thought there was this very narrow window when they thought the coral were going to spawn, and then it was the wrong species, and then they tried different collection containers the next night, but it didn't work. So then they said, okay, we're going to go up the coast, and we're going to try to collect them from there. But then that didn't work either. And I had told my editor that the culmination of this story was the successful collection of spawn. That was kind of the where this story is heading. I set it up at the beginning. And so I needed some way to end it. And so I decided to end it again in scene. I found out while I was there that this wasn't the first time that the Sea Corps group had been to Guam, that in fact that they had already started working on implanting small little corals on this in this nursery. And so that's where I thought, well, let me go out with someone who could talk to me. And I love that last scene because while I'm in the kayak, Nicole, I think she might have kayaked out. No, I think she swam out. I forget. She was in the water and she's treading water and she dives down, with her snorkel. She collects this thing, brings it back to the surface. And she's there treading water, and you can hear her breathing is different than if we were sitting in a studio. And I like that quality of her telling us her perspective while being in the water at the site that she's a part of. The whole thing just becomes, a kind of an enactment of what they're doing in the field. And for me, it's a very exciting way to talk about ideas and to talk about science where it's kind of unfolding with action before your ears. So that's kind of one of the crucial ingredients I think about when telling stories, and that's kind of putting everything in scene. The second thing that I think about when telling stories is action and the importance of creating some kind of movement and energy in a story is really important because it's okay to kind of paint a backdrop. I mean, Thoreau, for instance, wrote beautifully about Walden, but there wasn't that much happening. Of course, the point of his book wasn't for it to be a thriller, but often it can be particularly engaging for an audience when something is happening, when there's movement, when characters are changing, when there's something at stake, and action is a great driver of that. So I'm often looking for action that's happening naturally in a story to kind of play that out. So I wanted to give you two examples of that, and these are from two other types of, these are from kind of written stories that I've done. So the first is from an Instagram essay that I wrote. Instagram essays, I learned about at a narrative journalism conference I attended a few years ago, where you where you take a picture and you accompany it with a block of narrative text. And that text can be, of active writing and for there to be scene and action, but a little mini story unfolds in the Instagram post. So here's an example of one that I did while I was on a subsequent reporting trip in Iceland. I'll read from you what I wrote for that post. Ian Renfrew, who's pictured here, says riding in a little plane 50 to 100 feet above the ocean inside a storm is exhilarating. It snaps to life all the numbers and figures he spends the rest of the year poring over on his computer screen. It's on these flights when the weather gets real and a term like heat flux becomes an embodied experience, felt when a thrust of warm air pushes into the plane suddenly from below, or a word like turbulence sends shudders along the body of the aircraft, rattling windows and molars. This is when you can feel the ocean and the atmosphere talking to each other, the one throwing up sea spray and warmth, the other converting it into cloud and fog. The talking is ferocious, a high drama staged and shouted on the high seas, waves thrusting into the air blowing wildly back at the water, dizzying rain and vertiginous sleet whipped into a frenzy. And in the midst of all that meteorological mayhem, a small cherry plane bumps along, holding its course, slurping up data. Those numbers, regarded comfortably on Renfrew's computer screen in the days and months to come, will paint a portrait of the sloppy, soggy kiss of water and wind. It'll tell him whether these storms, called cold air outbreaks, are responsible for cooling down the surface layer of the ocean and making it denser. That water, transformed, will have no choice but to sink. And the thing Renfrew and his colleagues are really after is whether this water goes on to supply a crucial deep artery of the ocean circulatory system. We need to figure this out so that as the climate and the earth continue to change before our eyes, we can anticipate what an alteration to the ocean circulation would mean. Dramatic changes in weather, no doubt. Major impacts on civilization, no question. And so when the right storm descends upon the sea, Renfrew flies into its heart. The plane shudders and bounces, a choppy reminder of just how turbulent our future might be. So this is a case in which I interviewed Ian Renfrew and his team of atmospheric scientists. I didn't actually get to board the plane. That required more complicated and advanced training that I didn't go through. So I had to rely on what Ian and his group told me about what that experience was like. So this little essay, this Instagram essay, was kind of collated from talking to a variety of people and putting their thoughts together into what I hope is an evocative description of what it's like to be on board that plane. And as you see, the science is kind of takes a seat on that plane. Really, the action is that little plane bouncing in a very turbulent weather, a scene that for those who've taken to the skies on an aircraft probably have some familiarity with. So I'm drawing on that sense of shared experience, but most of it's a kind of action-y piece. And the science is still tucked inside of it. And the science kind of plays, it's kind of motivating the whole scene, but it's playing a supportive role in this narrative text as it's unfolding. And I think that's okay. The science doesn't always have to be front and center. The point of what I'm trying to do is to get people to remember the science and to think about the science. And I do that by trying to create as evocative a picture as I can. So that's one example of a scene of action that's taking place. Here's another example, a little just a bit different. It's actually for a publication at MIT called MIT Spectrum that I wrote for, and it was an article around the kind of the policy of artificial intelligence. And policy is one of the things that I feel least comfortable with. I don't know as much about it. So I was trying to find a way into the story, and I decided to lean into action to do this. So the interviews that I did for this story, I did either on Skype, in this case with Kate Darling, who you see here, I did with Skype or by phone. But again, I tried to create some action out of it. So here's the opening of that story. Kate Darling places a dinosaur robot the size of a house cat on the table and flips the power switch on its belly. The dinosaur, which Darling calls Mr. Spaghetti, purrs to life. He lifts his little green head and closes his blue eyes affectionately as she rubs his neck. He has touch sensors in his head and on his back, she explains. They develop their own personalities depending on how you treat them. Mr. Spaghetti is a Pleo, a next-generation robotic companion pet manufactured by a company in Hong Kong. Darling, an expert in social robotics, has 4 of them scattered around her apartment, including a feisty one named Yohai and a shy one named Peter. She holds up Mr. Spaghetti by his tail. A few seconds later, the onboard tilt sensor sends the little dinosaur into distress mode. Mr. Spaghetti starts to bleat and contort. He's not happy, says Darling. More than that, in this moment, Darling isn't happy either. It's what struck her when she first got Yohai a decade ago. I found myself getting distressed when it mimicked distress, she said. I wanted to know why I was responding like this, even though I knew it was all fake. That is, why was she having these feelings for Yohai, but not for a smoke alarm crying out for its batteries to be replaced? And what were the moral implications of developing an emotional tether to a dynamic social robot? So that starts the piece. And from there, I get into kind of the policy implications, the moral and ethical implications of what's happening when we talk about artificial intelligence. And so this was the way that I used action, in this case, a little robot dinosaur in distress, to kind of lead us into the topic at hand. The next thing I want to talk about is the idea of a hook. And when I think about a hook, I'm thinking about the way in which I'm trying to engage an audience member, a listener, or a viewer with the story that I'm telling. And I think about hooks from a variety of perspectives. But, you know, the first hook that I want to share, let me make sure I know which one is that. Oh, yes, okay. So the first hook that I want to share comes from a project that I worked on at Nova a couple of years ago. Nova has a platform called Nova Labs, which is our online gaming platform, where we take a topic in science and we gamify it, and we and our intended audience are middle and high schoolers and lifelong learners. We've done 6 labs to date. The most recent one is called the Evolution Lab, and I'm going to play you the trailer for that lab in a moment. The one we're working on at the moment is called the Polar Lab. So let me first play for you the trailer for the Evolution Lab, and then I'll talk a little bit about it.
Everywhere you go on this planet, on land, underground, in the air, and in the water, there's more and more life to be found. And all of it, even you, is shaped by the most incredible of forces: evolution. In Nova's Evolution Lab, you'll be climbing around the tree of life. Learn the basics from our videos, then work your way through 6 missions using physical traits and DNA to build out portions of the tree. Use the evidence for evolution, like fossils and where species live on Earth today, to figure out how organisms are related. Use the tree of life to battle disease, save someone's life, and probe the origins of humanity. Then conduct your own research with Deep Tree, a massive interactive tree containing over 70,000 species, each one a story of life on Earth. Play this lab, build the tree of life, which is your family tree, and discover just how connected you are to everything that's alive and everything that's ever lived.
So the point of this trailer is to really encourage people to play the lab. So we're trying to engage people with it and to get them excited about why this matters to them. So, you know, so part of that is to kind of describe how evolution as a concept is connected to each and every one of us and to our family trees. But we're also trying to set this up as a game and trying to engage an audience that would be interested in playing a game. So we show screenshots from the game itself. We're trying to entice people by showing them what this Evolution Lab has to offer. And so that there was a very intentional, a lot of intentional thought that went into figuring out what's the best way to kind of lay out what this lab is about, both in terms of the content, but also in terms of the experience. We got to work on a special project at Nova starting in 2017 for a couple of years, where we got a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to do an experiment, essentially, where we would, in addition to the kind of 20 or so hours of new television, 20, 25 hours of new television that Nova produces every year, and a lot of digital content related to that, to those films. We wanted to explore creating digital content, both digital videos and written newsletters, that highlighted the science connection to what was going on in the news. We know that the way the news cycle works is that often you kind of get a big story that kind of flashes onto the main news pages, that comes above the fold in the newspaper, kind of lingers for a day or two, maybe three, and then it kind of falls out of the news as a news story kind of comes into the dominant placement on these sites. And so what we were trying to do was as the wave was kind of surging and cresting, we were trying to insert news into that wave, to be part of the conversation around the news, leaving aside for a moment whether this is the right way that news stories and news should be kind of handled in public discourse. What we wanted to do was insert science into that discussion. And so we would take advantage of we would try to leverage breaking news stories that would happen and try to turn videos and newsletter copy around very quickly. We'd also anticipate news stories that would happen around holidays or other events and try to find ways of looking for a science angle. So I'm going to play for you the first 2 minutes from a video that we did in anticipation of the Winter Olympics. This video, all of our videos were geared for social media, primarily Facebook. And on Facebook, most people actually don't listen to videos. So we anticipated that people wouldn't listen. So most of the text is appearing on screen, printed rather than narrated. But I'll play for you the sound for this piece. And this video performed quite well with over 1 million views on Facebook. The screen is intentionally black now as I transition to the next slide. So if the screen's black, that's okay. I wanted to bring this up because we thought about a hook in this case as the hook of the news. Of course, there are people have different relationships with the news. Some people don't consume it. Many people do. And so this was an instance in which we knew folks would be talking about the Winter Olympics. Folks might be interested in curling. And so we decided to find a science angle into the Winter Olympics. But one of the things we observed with this project is that a view count, that the number of views isn't the only way to measure engagement or impact with a video. We did a couple of different videos around the clips that crossed North America in 2017. One of those videos was more of like a PSA. It was essentially how not to fry your eyeballs when going out to look at the solar eclipse. And I think a lot of people shared it because they were going to see the eclipse. That one did very well in terms of view count on Facebook with over 5 million views. But we also did a video. I got to go to Idaho to see the eclipse, and I interviewed people about what it was like. And this was a much more kind of heartfelt and tender video with people's impressions about how they were moved by the experience. It got way fewer views. I mean, it was in, it was way fewer. I think it was like tens of thousands, perhaps. Compared to the eyeball frying video. But what was very interesting was to see how people engaged in the comments. People saying how they too had experienced the eclipse, how they had felt moved as well, and how glad they were to watch this video and to kind of relive it a bit. So it was important for us to kind of think about engagement from a variety of different perspectives, both in terms of people who were viewing the content, liking it, sharing it, but also commenting on it in a way that felt as though we were helping to contribute to a conversation. The third example I want to play for you around hook. I won't set up too much except to say that I created this piece not for Nova. This is a video that I made for an organization along with a colleague of mine, Amanda Kowalski. We worked on it together for an organization called BirdNote.
they're essential tools for birding. They're your binoculars, your spotting scope, your field guide. And if you're black, you're going to need probably 2 or 3 forms of ID. Never wear a hoodie, ever. The word for an African American in camouflage is incognito. Blackbirds are your birds. Red-winged blackbirds, grackles, rusty blackbirds, brewer's blackbirds, black scoters, you claim black brant, crows, ravens, and blackbirds are largely maligned. Any bird that's black is my bird. The edge of day as light is fading, those crepuscular hours are the times when many birds come to life. It's such a beautiful time to bird, but if you're a black birder and you're going to bird at night, you better be careful, because you might be perceived as being up to no good. Be prepared to be confused with the other black birder. When I meet another black birder, it's like encountering an ivory-billed woodpecker, an endangered species. Extinction looms. These are the rules for the black birder. We have to do something to make birding, to make nature study in general more interesting to people of color. Out of every 100 bird watchers, how many are black?
5.
Yeah.
You might say that the message of the video is that very last statement, which is making nature study and science more appealing to all people. Again, the screen is intentionally left dark here. I think about this video in terms of a hook in a couple of different ways. The first is how important it is to, when telling stories, to think about who's telling those stories, and that notion of authorship and authenticity that comes from engaging people of a variety of perspectives. Drew Lanham, who's kind of the narrator and featured in this short video, actually wrote an article for Orion magazine entitled 9 Rules for the Black Bird Watcher, in which he laid out a lot of the content that I just shared with you in that video. He wrote it, and our charge, the charge that Amanda and I had for working on the BirdNote video, was to kind of capture this sentiment in video form. So Drew thinks a lot about this issue of how to engage people of diverse backgrounds in ecology and in nature study. He does a lot of posting on his own social media about this. And so Drew has a very important perspective that he was able to share in this article, and that I hope we were able to convey in the video. And it's a perspective that that he is able to share in a way that I would never be able to. And so it's important when I think about telling stories to engage people from a variety of perspectives and to help empower them to tell those stories in different ways. And also for people who are out there who are thinking about how they see themselves in the future and the types of jobs they can do, the roles they can have in our society. I think having people talk about that, wide perspective, the wider the set of perspectives we're able to share, the more important and empowering it is for audience as well. I want to talk, as I come to a close here, I want to share a couple of final examples. And the next idea I want to talk about here is character, and how important character is when thinking about a story. I did a story related to seagrass that grows in the Mediterranean Sea a few years ago for a radio outlet. And the arc of that story went a little something like this. It's actually, before I tell you what the arc was, so I did the story, and I was repurposing the story for a different outlet. And my second editor challenged me. He said, I feel like I've heard that story before. He hadn't heard that exact story, but he'd heard that kind of story. And the kind of general structure of that story he thought he'd heard before is that here's a species, the seagrass, that isn't doing well. it lives in a place that you may never go to. And the reason it's not doing well is because of you. And here's what a small group is trying to do to help this species out, this ecosystem or environment out. Who knows if it's going to work? Time will tell. That's the kind of general arc. And my editor said, do you have anything else to kind of make the story about something different? And something very interesting had happened over the course of reporting that story for me. One of the central characters that I'd interviewed had died. And he had died actually free diving in the location where he studied the seagrass. And in the first version of the radio story, I didn't include mention of Alex at all because my editor thought it might take away, my first editor thought it might take away from the story. And that's not a wrong perspective. There are countless ways to tell a single story. But my second editor said, what if you made the entire thing about Alex and about him? And so here's how I set up that second version of the story.
This story begins with a man who devoted himself to an ecosystem and an organism, and it ends with his death, a loss that came all too early when he was only 37 years old. His name was Alex Lorente, and we met back in the summer of 2011 in L'estartit, a picture postcard Spanish town up the coast from Barcelona. Lorente and I were on board a small boat with a couple of his colleagues from Submon, a marine conservation group. We headed towards one of the scrubby Medes Islands in the Mediterranean. Our boat stopped just offshore. Lorente peered over the side.
Today the visibility is very good. From the boat we can see the bottom, and now we take a look underwater.
One of Lorente's colleagues, marine biologist Jordi Sanchez, put on his mask and dunked his head underwater.
So the whole story becomes centered around Alex. And I found this version of the story to be more compelling because what I ended up doing was trying to get listeners to care about Alex by making it about him, by introducing the fact that he dies at the very beginning, introducing the question, hopefully in listeners' minds, that how exactly did he die and why is it related to the story, to get them to listen all the way through. And because Alex cares so much about the seagrass and about the ecosystem and the people around that ecosystem, I'm hoping that the audience, because they care about Alex, they can kind of vicariously care about the seagrass as well. So this was a case in which the story, in some ways, like I used some of the same exact sentences, but the whole structure of it, the focus of it, how much I leaned into Alex or not at all was completely different. I have one last example, but I think I'm going to hold that in the interest of questions and answers. So I'll just wrap up by saying a couple other things and kind of bringing it home. The notion of telling stories and thinking about storytelling has taken on a very special new meaning for me now as a father of two kids. I have a son who just turned a year, that's Raja on the left, and a daughter who's a little more than 3, Layla, on the right. And my wife and I love being outdoors, and we love taking ourselves and now them camping. So we were on a camping trip earlier this year, and my wife was with Raja in the tent, and I took Layla for a walk down to the beach. And when we got to the beach, Layla took one look at the sea, and she sat down on the sand, and she took off her shoes and felt the sand beneath her toes. And she walked right down to the water's edge. And when I think about what I'm trying to do as a storyteller, in kind of its most idealized form, it's about trying to connect people with the world around us, and the world that I found so enchanting since I was a little kid. And so that's what I'm trying to do for people. And in some cases, in a couple of special cases, for two little people in particular, I try to give them a front row seat. So thank you so much for your attention. I'll pause there for questions.
Ari, that was really wonderful. Thank you. We have lots and lots of questions that have come in. I just want to mention briefly that curling video, amazing. And I think my family might have been responsible for some of those hits. I think at least 100 on our end. I'm married to a curling fanatic. So we've got lots of questions here. Let me see how many we can get to. The first one that I thought I'd ask here came in from a few folks. It's about audience. How does storytelling, how is it different for you when you're speaking to a scientific audience versus a non-scientific audience? And sort of in tandem with that, are there any resources for people who are working to sort of hone their craft to tell their stories to these audiences?
Great set of questions. Thanks, Julie. So, you know, my audience is, I am always keeping in mind that my audience is not a technical audience. The types of stories that I'm reporting and that I'm airing on the radio or posting online, or the games that we're making, these are intended for a general audience. Now, that audience can have a science background. They may or may not have formal science training, but really I'm thinking about how can I make this understandable and engaging for a wide audience. Now, I'm hoping that scientists too will find it interesting, but that's not my first goal. In terms of other resources that folks can look at, a site that is terrific is called transom.org. That's TRANSOM.org. It's a curated workspace for public radio and public media creators. And there are tons of resources there. So it's primarily aimed at kind of audio storytelling. So there's stuff on like what mic to buy and what piece of software to use to edit audio. But there is a cornucopia of resources related to just how to tell a good story. Some of the advice is more focused on audio, but a lot of the advice is very kind of general, and I think would be a great place for people to start.
Yeah, great, thank you. And just in following on that, obviously, you know, radio is it's a medium in which we're listening, and the sounds are important. We have a couple questions about your process. Music, background sounds. What is your process for doing that? Is it part of the story itself? Do you have any suggestions for how to manage that? And also, what is your process in general? Do you already have a vision for your story when you go out and record, and you come back to the editing suite and sort of figure it out there, or how does that really, this is about process. What is that process like for you?
Yeah, sure. So the first part of that question, you know, I kind of think about the different types of elements you might put into a story. And this applies to radio, but also to video, you know, and even just written stuff, you know, the different kind of, but in radio, you know, I'm thinking about, okay, so there's the words that someone tells me in an interview. There's the words that I might write and then narrate. There's the sounds that I'm collecting in the field. There's sound effects, there's music, you know, these are all elements that can kind of be brought together. And a lot of it comes down to style and an outlet. So a news piece, I rarely put music in it because, you know, if I'm like that choral story, you probably heard a little bit of music at the very end. That was the music that NPR added to kind of transition out of that story into the next one. So they use music almost as palate cleansers between news stories. So usually news stories don't have music in them, nor do they have sound effects unless you're like very intentionally saying, you know, it might sound something like this, and then you play the sound effect. Because usually news reporting, the ingredients tend to be nat sound, so natural sound recorded on location that is evocative of a place. And people have a variety of different views on what kind of qualifies as appropriate natural sound. Some folks say that, like, so for instance, I'll often be like, okay, hold on, I just need to collect the sound of you. Can you put that beaker back on the platform and I can get that sound? Some people would say, oh, I don't even ask them to redo it. Like they want it to be so verite, so real that they'll only record the sounds as they're unfolding. There's no such thing as like, okay, take two. You know, I mean, that's very different. So a lot of it's like personal preference, the style of the outlet. I will say that I had the opportunity to work on a show recently for the Museum of Science in Boston that was a lot of fun and kind of adjacent to a lot of the examples I played for you. The intention was to make this an immersive audio storytelling show. So I collaborated with a sound designer and composer named Ian Koss, who who's very talented. And so I reported the stories, most of which had very little narration. It was mostly the voice of the people that I recorded, and not a lot of natural sound. And Ian created these gorgeous sonic landscapes that he architected using sound design programs and music composition. And people were blindfolded. So this was a very different kind of experience. The intention was really to have folks fall into the story in a way that you might not if you're driving home listening to a news story. You don't want to put a blindfold on. So that's kind of to answer the first part of that question. And in terms of the process, in terms of what I think about, I'll often think about, one of my editors early on, David Barron, encouraged me to think about, it's good to have a sense of what the structure of the story is before you step foot on the ground. Now, like all the time, that story structure changes. I was in Guam, the corals weren't spawning, so I had to figure something out. But it's helpful to know that, the place I'm trying to get to is a payoff, is a place of payoff. So I need to find some payoff while I'm in the field. That's a lot harder to do later when I'm back home, here trying to help an audience imagine what payoff or success might be like. So it's a mix.
Great. Great. So we have a lot of specific questions here too. Storytelling requires movement in the plot. Could you talk more about using mystery as the storytelling arc versus using a plot twist as the arc itself? Sure.
So, I worked on a story once about a kind of and it was this earthquake in central Connecticut, or like some kind of, not really a terrible earthquake, but kind of a geological rumbling in central Connecticut. And, before they brought the geologists in, no one knew what the thing was. And people were just, it goes back to Native American times, kind of talking about what these sounds meant, to more recently, like how people understood them and interpreted them. And that story, I had the luxury, it was much longer, it was like 12, 13 minutes. I had the luxury of lingering in the mystery of what these things were for a longer period of time. As I said, there's no one right way to tell a story. Often, though, it's important with both mystery and with plot twist, what you're trying to do is to tee up and to tease what's to come to get people to keep listening. So mystery is an intentional device where you're like, what's going on here? And the reason for the listener or the viewer to keep listening or watching is to find out the answer to that question, to solve the mystery. When it comes to plot twists, I worked on another story also for the Museum of Science for a different show at their planetarium that was about kind of the central question. This question I set up at the beginning is, when do we see our first glimmer of light? Is it when we exit the womb and we tumble out into the world, or is it before that? That sets up the question. And then I go on this kind of long, this was another 12-minute piece, kind of meandering road to get to the answer, which in fact, it turns out we actually see some light, very faint light in utero, because light can pass through. But to discover that, there's a whole series of things that have to happen. And there are twists and turns that happen along the way. But it's important for the audience that I signpost early on where we're headed. Otherwise, it's like, why are we on this road again? Why did we just make a left turn? It should all be building to the central moment. So whether you're using plot twists or mystery, signposting, indicating early on, forecasting where it's going is very important.
That's great. And you mentioned, length, that you had the luxury of a 12-minute piece. We had a question here about the length of your stories. What works? What should we aim for? Is there a length, or is it really like? Well, I'll let you answer that question.
Yeah, I think where you were going with that, Julie, makes a lot of sense. It's often kind of format dependent. NPR, they've got a very tight kind of window, and it's like a 3 to 4 minute window. So you kind of condense a story. And I'm doing a lot of shorter stories in the 3 to 5 minute range. I often feel like, okay, most stories can kind of be told in that amount of time. So if you do want to extend beyond that, for the Museum of Science show that I described with the blindfolds, we were creating an hour-long show out of 4 stories. So each of those stories had to be much longer than 5 minutes. I was looking for stories that could sustain that length. So a lot of it has to depend on the venue, on the forum for sharing that story. But often it's helpful if you're just starting out, play the story for someone and see when they kind of start to gloss over, and then notice that, or notice for yourself when you're starting to kind of tune out as well, to kind of bring it down, to pare it down. I think that there are tons of stories to tell, and it's important to just experiment with both the format and that duration to see what works. Because, as I hope I've illustrated, there's no single way to tell any story. There are lots of ways. Let me also mention, I did skip over an example. I'm not going to play that example, but I did want to mention one other thing that I'm involved with, and that's a group called Story Collider. It's a live show where we get scientists and non-scientists up on stage to tell true personal stories that somehow connect to science. We have regular shows in 14 places around the world, including in Boston, New York, Atlanta, in Wellington, New Zealand, in London, in Vancouver, Toronto. So check out storycollider.org to find a show near you, but also we've got a podcast, and it'd be great for you to have a listen and check out some stories that way. These are very narrative driven stories. And I should also mention that, I'm happy if you're interested in following up later, I'm happy to chat with folks. I know we still have a couple minutes for questions. This isn't meant to be a wrap up, but I did want to get it in. You can email me, Ari Daniel Shapiro @gmail.com. Happy to continue the conversation afterwards. Julie, go ahead.
Sure thing. So I'll ask one last question. As a NOVA video producer, what was your most challenging science story to produce, and why? How did you overcome that challenge?
Okay. I don't know if this was the most, but this is certainly one of the most. We worked on a 2-part video on Bitcoin and blockchain, and to convey what those concepts are quickly, succinctly, clearly. And so that was one thing. Just to write the script was challenging. How did we do it? We wrote a script. We sent it to people. We worked on it. I worked with one of our interns at Nova, Bella Solinot, on this. We went back and forth on it. We finally got it to a place where we thought it was good. We sent it to other colleagues. They sent us feedback. We redid it. We rewrote the script. Finally, we had scripts we could work with. Then we had to think about, how are we going to visualize this? These are abstract concepts. So that took a lot of effort too, to come up with kind of a fun and engaging way to do that. And so that just kind of, it was basically like frame by frame, thinking about how are we going to talk about it. Using a concrete example helped. I think we used an example of how someone might sell a llama using Bitcoin and blockchain. And so then we got a picture of a llama in there walking. So you can find those on the Nova website, on our Facebook page, on YouTube. So I'd say that was certainly one of the more challenging stories that I had to work on.
Great. Well, thank you. I think we've unfortunately run out of time. So I just want to thank you for this wonderful presentation today. The MIT Alumni Association thanks you for taking the time to be with us and for sharing your work with the alumni around the globe. In addition, thank you to our alumni viewers for tuning in. As a reminder, today's presentation will be on the Alumni Association YouTube channel under the Career Lunch and Learn playlist in about a week. If you have any questions, please email us at alumnicareers@mit.edu. And thanks again for tuning in. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Julie, and everyone.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.